Okay, we are back for our third episode of the SSP podcast, I guess, as we are calling it. Really creative there. Today, we want to dive into some of the speed training that we do here at SSP. We want to talk a little bit about kind of what constitutes speed training from our point of view. We're going to talk about some of the mechanical things that we talk about with some of our athletes. Maybe the basics of our progressions and kind of how we like to bring athletes along as we're doing their speed training. And then at the end, we might even dive into a little bit of like guys in the industry who we feel like do a really great job with it and who we like to follow closely, read what they're doing, and take some of those things and try to implement them here at the gym. So again, my name is Joe Service. This is Alex Loosebrock. Episode 3. Here we go. So to jump right into it, I guess kind of what brought this along is we are in the middle of January here in Omaha, Nebraska. So it is currently snowing outside, and it is a little more challenging in this region to truly train speed with our athletes. Okay, we are lucky enough to have a 30-yard stretch of turf in the gym, so it allows us to be a little bit more flexible, I guess, with our speed training and the stuff that we do with our guys. But we're also limited because we can't go out and run, 40-yard dashes, 50-yard build in, or flying tens with a 40-yard build or anything like that. We have to sort of get creative and put our heads together as to how we're going to progress our guys, and making sure that if they have a showcase, in the spring or in the summer or, somewhere on their calendar, that they are ready to go and run their 60-yard dash, basically. As a lot of you probably already know, we work with primarily baseball, softball, right? And in that world, whether it's right or wrong, and that's maybe an argument for another day, we have to get our athletes prepared to run 60-yard dashes, because that is a main metric, right? So that's one of the biggest things we see from our guys and our girls when they come in is we need to get faster, right? We need to be able to showcase our speed, whether it's stealing bags on the field or whether it is running a 60-yard dash at a showcase or a practice or something like that, because we know speed plays, right? And that is something in this game of unknowns that is baseball. If you can flat out run, you are going to be of high value to your team, and that is just going to bring you up the ladder as far as the level you can play at, and again, the different kind of fits that coaches can have for you as far as their team goes.
So, and there's a lot of different areas that speed really kills at the end of the day in baseball. Like, outfielders tracking down a fly ball, base runners trying to steal a base, guys busting out of the box, home to first, or, home to second, or, even for a triple or whatever it may be, right? Like, at the end of the day, speed kills. And, that's why we have to train it so much here. And not only top speed and max velocity focus, but a acceleration standpoint too, because they spend so much more time accelerating than they do at their actual top speed. So usually, like with our training philosophy here, if guys are coming in at least 2 days a week, they'll have an acceleration focus day where we're doing sled loaded sprints and short bursts, and then we'll have a top speed focus day. And granted, this time of the year, it's a little bit more difficult because of our limited space. But where it's an unloaded, all-out sprint, for 20 yards, if we can get it warmer outside, 30 yards, and we time those so that we can always measure and keep moving forward for that stuff.
Right, and I think that's that philosophy of making sure that every athlete that comes in, if they're coming in 2 days a week, they are getting they're sprinting 2 days a week, right? And we've talked about this on a previous pod, but like sprint work is a foundational component of our entire program, right? We understand that, you and I do. Maybe some other people out there understand it just as clear as we do, but there's also maybe some people out there who don't, and it's really the thing that can lift a lot of other qualities, right? We talk about explosiveness, we talk about rhythm, we talk about your ability to contract and relax really fast, all these different qualities that are trained with sprinting. So we really feel whether you are a PO or whether you are a center fielder, that the sprint work is a huge component or kind of a cornerstone of your training. So kind of going back to like how we break it down, like you said, sled accelerations. When we get to this this point of the year, some of our accelerations might be kind of built into like a contrast pairing where they might be doing a sled sprint and then a bodyweight sprint. But if you want to rewind all the way back to like when we first get our guys, maybe they're just coming off of their season, we need to make sure that they are able to hit the correct positions and feel the proper mechanics of acceleration, right? We'll just talk about acceleration right now. And so, we really feel like resisted sprinting helps with those things, right? If you have an athlete who doesn't really understand how he's supposed to be, putting force into the ground, what that kind of front side mechanic is supposed to look like during acceleration, slowing him down a little bit by putting a resisted sled around his waist and then asking them to execute their sprint, I mean, really can clean up a lot of those kind of foundational entry level issues that we might see with some of our sprinters, right?
100%. 100%.
And so
It elongates the force window that they have to, be at when they do start their acceleration, right? When we do our heavy loaded sprinting, right, we're elongating that force production window from that max force production from this uber split second time window to a multi-second burst. And then on top of that, that sled load forces them to get into a good forward lean and drive in a more horizontal way and really project horizontally rather than pop straight up and then work against themselves.
Right. So it kind of, what you said there kind of like blends the two worlds. It kind of blends the, some of those mechanical things. And then it also kind of brings in like the force production side of it, right? Because we understand if you're just looking at, let's just look at a 60-yard dash again, because that's kind of the world that we live in with our athletes and their showcase events and their practices that they might be timing those at. When athletes are accelerating, it's usually going to create a longer ground contact time during that acceleration phase, whether that's 6 yards, 8 yards, 10 yards, 12 yards, depending on the athlete. That front end acceleration phase is going to be a little bit different athlete to athlete, but it allows them to feel their push into the floor, right? That push, like, so we got turf in here. We always say, or at least a cue I like to use is like push the turf back towards the wall, right? They need to feel that kind of driving into the floor from that angle that you were talking about, and slowing them down with the sled and having them physically have to produce more force because they're overcoming maybe a 50% body weight load or sometimes even 100% body weight load on that sled creates that feel. And so then when we go into more body weight type short burst sprinting where we're still working acceleration, they don't want to, hopefully they understand that they can stay in that acceleration phase a little bit longer, right? They can push and they can almost feel like they're a little bit slow off the line because they're not just going to be like turning over, but they're actually going to be striking the ground at that good, 45 degree, sometimes it's a little bit different angle, and projecting themselves forward during that accel phase, right?
100%.
And I think a lot of people kind of get that misconstrued that they want to get tall right away. They want to get that cycling action going, as soon as possible. And yes, there is a time and place for that. But if we skip over that acceleration phase, or if we're not very good at blending or moving from acceleration into our top speed mechanics, we're going to have some issues. There's going to be kind of a kink in the hose somewhere that we need to address through their training. And running is also a thing where our athletes it's really easy to kind of get domed up about, right? It's easy to kind of get in your feels sometimes, and sometimes timing every rep, like we discussed, and I'm about to go off, I think, on a tangent maybe, but timing every rep can almost, it is a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah,
We love having the feedback, but then all of a sudden, if they come in here and have a day that maybe is a little bit below what they did the previous day, or like even what their expectations are for that day, it can be a frustrating thing, right?
100%.
So you can pull me back onto topic here, but I'll finish my thought. When we're doing our sprint training, whether it's our longer distances or our short acceleration, trying to have them keep in mind that you're not going to PR every day, right? It's kind of a completely different animal than some of the stuff we do in the weight room, on the weight room side, right? Because a lot of that stuff, if you have a kid with a really low training age, they're just going to be able to stack 5 or 10 pounds on every single lift, the compound lifts, that is, every week when you see them for the first 6 to 8 weeks. And that's not
100%.
necessarily like a huge strength thing, but maybe it's just a skill-based thing. They're getting
Mhm.
more comfortable with the movement or something like that. Whereas the sprint work, you might have a good day, and then a bad day, and then a good day, and then a bad day, and a bad day, and a good day, and it's a little bit more up and down. You got to kind of help them navigate that roller coaster that they are riding with the sprint stuff.
100%. And then that kind of, I mean, to kind of go off what you're saying, that kind of plays into what we talked about in our second podcast, right? Like the process versus outcome orientation, right? Like
Yep.
understanding what we're working on, even if even if you're running normally a 1.8, right, for your time 10, and then on that day you're running a 1.9, or maybe you're having a really bad day and you're at a 1.95 or worse, right? Understand that, yeah, we might not be necessarily pushing the envelope from like getting faster on that day, but we're still training good positions and getting some sort of training stimulus out of that day to push us in a positive direction. And then to kind of reel back to our original thing, when we talk about sprinting and acceleration, obviously they're hand in hand, right? You can't sprint without accelerating, right? But you can accelerate without fully sprinting. But with our limited distance in here, we're really, really catered towards acceleration focus, right? Because the entire, top speed acceleration graph, it's a steep incline, and then it starts to mellow out, right? And over that first 10 to 20 yards, it's pretty steep. It's pretty steep. And then once we get to our 20 to 30 and our 30 to 40, that's when it starts to level out. And when we're from our 30 to 40, that's usually when you get to your top speed. But that being said, when we are doing our, flying 10 days, right? A lot of guys think that they need to pop up after the first 10 yards, right? But in reality, you need to continue, using the cue that you were talking about, pushing the turf to the wall behind you, right? And still going forward rather than going upward. But I mean, we see all ends of the spectrum here, right? Like we have guys that are awesome from an acceleration standpoint, but their top speed could use work. We have guys that are terrible at accelerating, but great at top speed, right? But you still have to train both at the same time, right? And that's why we usually dedicate 2 different days for it too, right? So then our first day, you talked about our contrast pairing with our little bit more, trained experienced trained athletes. We're like, hey, let's get you into those positions, and then next 2 sprints after you do your loaded, let's take the weight off, set you up in, a horizontal or lateral position, and just go and feel out those positions and then just rip it.
Yeah, let's dive in a little bit. Dive into a little bit of the training protocol that we're using with guys. So let's just start. Let's say guys are just coming off summer ball. It is, let's just say it's October 1st. They took a little break, or maybe they played fall ball, right? So talk a little bit about the process that we use with them and kind of lead us up to now. So just for those who don't know, we normally train in 4-week blocks. So usually after 4 weeks, we are making adjustments to guys' cards, athletes' cards, right? and figuring out if they've kind of checked all the boxes and if they're ready to progress certain things, or if they're still struggling with certain skills, movements. If the strength isn't where we want them, we might hold them back a little bit. So usually our training is 4 weeks at a time, and we kind of have it all mapped out before we even get guys. Obviously, we have athletes who are kind of jumping in maybe later on during the year, but let's just say perfect scenario, it's October 1, and we know we have all the way up to the beginning of March to train that athlete, and speed is a top priority. Let's kind of take people through the different aspects of our acceleration phases, since we're kind of talking acceleration right now, and then maybe we can double back and do a little bit more
100%.
with our top speed.
100%. I know. So when we first get guys, right, and this is something that Joe and I always put our heads together, like you and I always put our heads together on, right? When we first get guys, we want to really work on that horizontal projection and force production horizontally throughout the entire thing, right? So usually that's when we, if we have them for October, we'll do a month pretty much of heavy loaded sprinting with a half kneeling start, just linear start. So then they can really feel that forward lean and force production out. Because when we get in the half kneeling position, if they get vertical at all, they'll just pop straight up, right? And they can feel that, right? But once they get a good lean forward and push out, right? Granted, the times aren't going to be as great as if you're just in a normal 2-point stance or anything like that, right? But it's a completely different training aspect that we're going for. So then we work for like linear half kneeling for about that month. The next month, we usually continue with about 100% of our sled load for body weight. And then we switch from a linear to a, lateral half kneeling start. And mainly to cater towards our population that we work with, right? Because we work with so many baseball and softball players, when they are, trying to steal a base or, accelerate laterally, they're pushing that way, right? And so when we're in a half kneeling lateral start, they can at the same time feel if they pop up, right? And it forces them to be able to turn and go.
Right.
And then usually after that, we're at January about that time. And then we start to lower the sled weight to about 50%, depending on the athlete too, right? Because some guys still struggle with, force production during that time. So sometimes we'll lower the weight down to 50% of their body weight and elongate the window from about 10 yards to 15. And then we'll do like a lateral bound sprint to start to introduce some rhythm. And then kind of that, there's a big stigma about the false step when it comes to base running. But it's something that we have found out that does actually increase sprint times overall and top speed, like getting to it.
Right.
And so we introduced the lateral bound sprint, and so introduce that rhythm and go. And then once we start to get to February or even later January, we start to do it times 3 lateral bounds, then go.
More rhythm.
Introduce kind of more rhythm. And then once we start to get to March, right, that's when we start really honing in, like, hey, let's start doing base running starts, right? We have done all the prep to feel the horizontal and linear projection. All right, now we got our lateral projection. All right, now let's work on more skill and sport specific stuff during that time, because once we get to that end of that 4-month training cycle and we start to get to in season, right, those guys are working out of that position almost on the daily, right?
A lot. Yep.
Especially, well, not even daily, but like with games and stuff like that, unless the guy goes 0 for a million and never gets on base, which it's very, very rare to ever find a person that will do that. They'll be working out of a base running start. And so that's kind of what we look for out of the guys. And then we tailor it to where each guy's at from a training age and from, what their load / force velocity profile kind of shows us.
Right. My brain's going like a couple different ways again. I want to talk about some of like maybe the myths or misinformation out there about sled sprinting. I want to talk about the false step that you brought up a little bit, and I'm just trying to figure out where we should go next. Let's talk for a second about the kind of the old school training mentality, I guess, of not using resisted sprints, and how people say that if you train slow like that, it's going to create a slower athlete. And really, we've laid out the argument against it. So the first bullet point in my brain is the positions that we want to put the athlete in, right? So yeah, we're concerned about times, but at the same time, if you got a new athlete, we're really looking for somebody to be able to hit the proper positions and show us like a predetermined amount of strength, whether that is, ability to drive through the hamstring, the quad, ankle stiffness, all of that stuff. But then we also, with the way our training is set up, we don't have a lot of ability to take people through, like wall drill series. So, and we have a kid hitting in the background, so that's what that noise is. Hopefully it's not too loud. But we can't do a lot of wall work where we're slowing them down and having them feel those positions through switches or marches on the wall. And so I really feel like the ability to use the sled helps us kind of cover our bases with that. And also, I feel like if we're doing our due diligence as coaches and loading them properly, we have seen nothing but positive benefits of sled work, right? So that I feel like the and there's a lot of other people out there who are smarter than you and I who are utilizing resisted sprinting and getting great results for their guys, whether they're on shred mills, whether they're on like those 1080 runners, whether they're on the rocket runners. There's plenty of tried and true pieces of equipment out there. We just happen to use small rogue sleds with a harness around them that we can belt to the kid, right? So we are all on board, and we think it is just a really strong way to develop that acceleration like we've been talking about, right?
100%. And I mean, you brought up a couple different really good modalities, right? And we got to give credit where credit's due. I mean, we've been doing, you've been in this industry longer than I have, right? And you've been doing sled loading, sprinting with other guys and stuff like that for a little while. And Les Spellman is a main guy that we get a lot of information from, right? He is, in my eye for sure, he's top dog when it comes to sprint training, right? He works with, a bunch of combine guys for the NFL. He works with NFL guys all the time, works with baseball players, works with, track athletes, like works with all these different people. And he talks a little bit more different than like, hey, we're just going to do 100% body weight or 50% body weight for sled loading or 25% body weight or stuff like that, right? He goes more.
Yeah, they bring GPSs into it. Yeah.
Yeah. And they go based off velocity decrement, right? And it's a really good concept. We're in the process of kind of scaling it, I guess, for our entire facility, right? But we run our speed school and stuff like that, and that's when we use a lot of some of the training protocols we get from Les Spellman, for example, and really kind of apply it there. I mean, we still apply a lot of the principles in here, right? We don't just be like, oh, our in-house guys are way different than our speed school guys. We're not going to train them the same. They're still trained very, very similar, right? But for example, with our speed school, we use velocity decrement and we do a initial testing there where we do multiple different sled loaded sprints to be able to create a whole load velocity profile on these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And from kind of getting some experience doing that type of stuff, we've been able to kind of deduce and put guys into categories that need to work on force production or need to work on mechanics or both, or the outliers when they start to get to 25% VDEC. That's like a Jake Myers or a Cole Eaton or someone like that, where they're already, their force projection window is unreal, right? Their horizontal projection and mechanically wise, they're unreal, right? But, a lot of guys aren't at that level. So we do have to work more in that heavier loaded sprinting to be able to do that. And to kind of tie back to your point where there used to be a little bit of a stigma towards, hey, if you train them to run slower, with sleds, they're just going to run slower, right? We're not going for full out maximal velocity at that point. We're going for force production in a small short window and projecting out of that. And we've seen really, really good results overall, both with athletes in-house with our normal, semi-private training model and within our speed school of doing this type of stuff and seeing, oh my gosh, this guy's 10-yard dash went from a 1.65 to a 1.56, right? And that's,
Right.
I mean, when you bring up a tenth of a second in sprint world, oh my gosh, you're
Right.
doing
Big.
backflips,
Right. And I think the other thing that we can't emphasize enough is that when they are loaded, they are still max effort sprints, right? That is
100%.
the good side of the laser of using the lasers, right? We have numbers that we are coming in and trying to beat every single time, and the athletes are not running at 50% of an effort if they have 50% load on their sled, right? It is still a maximum effort, depending on the load, 2 to 3 second burst there. We're just loading them up to create that stronger push, that greater amount of force production on those acceleration steps. So it's not like we are running at 50% effort. Everything that we do is a max effort on the sprinting. Whether your times are
100%.
up or down for that day, we still expect that out of our athletes. And I think that's the other thing that kind of gets lost sometimes. Like you really need to push some of these younger athletes to feel what that kind of full exertion is. A lot of
100%.
them, when we're getting them into test, we watch them, and you and I look at each other, and we're like, okay, we have to teach them what like full max effort sprinting actually is, right? Like they
100%.
obviously think that they're hitting as fast as they can go, but to us, it looks like they are shutting it down, 3 or 4 yards early and kind of coasting through. So the other thing that I think is huge in that kind of in the sprinting realm, especially with our younger athletes, is just teaching them what a true maximal effort is.
100%. 100%. And like you're
Um,
saying, a lot of people don't know how, a lot of athletes sometimes don't know how to even go at 100% intensity,
right.
right? And I mean, with some of the in-house throwing stuff that we do here, you know, I've seen a pretty significant correlation between increases in sprint times and increase in, pitch velocity or even like pull down velocity or that type of stuff, right? And it's because they're teaching themselves to go at 100%, psychologically, right? To be able to
Mm-hmm.
turn on all of those physiological factors, right? But at the same time, we're also creating a better overall athlete that can produce high velocity and high forces at a high rate, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
really what we're going for. And take away like the throwing side of it from a hitting standpoint too, right? Like if a guy's just going through the motions, granted, you don't want to swing that looks like you're going 110 miles an hour all the time, right? Because all of a sudden someone spins a breaking ball and you're eating dirt, right?
Right.
But like that increases their ceiling, and in turn, by hiring that ceiling, we're hiring the floor at the same time, right? And
Right.
also those dribblers that they're hitting in the 6 hole, right? Instead of it being an easy 6-3, all of a sudden the dude's beating it out.
Yeah, you might as well, right? Have that
Exactly.
capability.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I know we're kind of doing this one on the fly, but as we have people starting to roll in, one last thing I want to touch on, and maybe we'll come back and do a second episode diving into some of our top speed stuff a little bit more. But I think the last thing I want to talk about, and we talked about how we kind of approach it, is maybe some things that we see in the industry or other coaches, whether they're running their practice or whatnot, like what their interpretation of maybe like speed work, quote unquote, is, and maybe
Mhm.
some of like the holes that we see in that. So like the first thing that jumps out to me, and again, we're not trying to talk to right now like maybe other strength and conditioning professionals, because in our world this is kind of like common knowledge. I really want to maybe talk to more parents and sport coaches right now about maybe some things that they are doing that they kind of put under the tab of speed, but maybe aren't really speed. So I guess the thing that we see a lot of is and this might be beating a dead horse, but like speed ladders, okay? Everybody thinks that if you get a speed ladder out and you're doing some rhythmic pattern through it, there's a million of them under the sun, that is going to create better speed for your athletes. And maybe it will in a certain aspect, but it won't in the aspect that you and I just got done talking for the last 30 minutes about. It's not going to increase force production, right? It's not going to increase the mechanics of that athlete sprinting. It's not going to teach them how to make sure that their upper body is in sync with their lower body when they're accelerating out. It's not going to teach them how to stay low. It might have some benefits on the very maybe like peripheral as far as teaching them rhythm, right? Having them, maybe they're developing a little more ankle stiffness if they're doing them correctly. Coordination is all involved in those speed ladders, but it's not teaching them how to accelerate, right? So we, something that I feel like we're always talking about and fighting against is the speed ladder, or even like some cone setup or something like that, or mini hurdles setup where athletes are getting run kind of through the meat grinder with some big circuit or something like that. And it's under the guise of speed and agility, when really what it boils down to is maybe a above average warm up, maybe a below average warm up, depending on the athlete in question. And then really like low intensity conditioning work, right?
100%,
When you're talking about
100%.
these kind of like 8-station circuits or something like that.
100%. And really to really put a bow on what you're saying right there, right? In order for you to get faster, right, or accelerate better, you have to accelerate. You have to sprint. You have to have a full out maximal, burst that you're covering ground on, right? Because then you're actually working on your horizontal projection. You're working on your turnover rate. You're working on your touchdown distance. You're working on all these different things that us as coaches are kind of looking for, right? But you're doing it organically and letting your body self-organize and do it, right? But it's like the same concept as throwing, right? For you to get better at throwing, you generally have to throw, right? There's other things that can play into it, right? Like kind of what you're talking about, right? With the ladders, like they might have a small role in it, right? But it is not what gets them to that level, right? You can do speed ladders for an entire winter and never do any sprint training, and we haven't tried this, right? But like, I almost willing to put money down that the person probably didn't get much faster, right? Unless if they would have actually done acceleration work and top speed work, right? If they do those two things for an entire 4-month window, you can guarantee that their bad days are going to be what they thought their good days were at the beginning of the 4 months, right? And that's one thing, like, you got to sprint in order to get better at sprinting, right? And just like you got to accelerate to get better at accelerating. And then that's where like the sleds come in, right? Accelerating with the sleds, right? That's why we use them. And then that's also why we contrast it, right? Because like, to go back to the original argument that you were talking about, like, hey, if you train them to run slow with sleds, right, they're just going to run slow, right? How you can mitigate that, to kind of, put a bow and make it feel all fancy stuff, is by contrast training, right? And getting them to feel that load, and then just let their body self-organize in those positions that we're trying to create muscle memory with, and just go, right? But dude, at the end of the day, speed kills, right? That's tried and true. Speed kills. You can have a guy that's a $180 and 6'4" a $180 that is fast as hell, that hits just little flick shots in the gap, and he can hit 30 doubles in a year because he's so freaking fast, right? And as long as he stays healthy, speed kills at the end of the day.
Yeah. The last one that I want to touch on to kind of get into like dispelling some rumors, and it's a little bit more prevalent now as we get closer to tryout time and everything. I'm not envious of the high school coaches trying to take teams through tryouts or starting practice when it's 10 degrees outside and we're getting another 6 inches of snow today. So I know putting all that together is a nightmare as far as where they're going to have all these guys. Some schools have 60 or 70 kids coming out and what they're going to do. I have very fond memories, I'm saying that sarcastically, of during tryouts. It would be, 2 groups in the gym and then 1 group in the hallways or something like that. And we were doing speed work. And it was like, we're just going up and down the hallways, up and down the hallways, up and down the hallways. So, you know, something that people need to understand is that in order to really qualify what you are doing as speed work and not either high intensity conditioning or low intensity conditioning, you need to give your athletes proper rest periods, right? So you need to make sure that when it is time to go again for rep number 2, that you are fully recovered from rep number 1. All right.
100%.
And, general rule of thumb for that, I didn't make this up, but people, again, who are smarter than me like to say that like 10 seconds for every yard, correct? I'm not getting that wrong. I feel like I could be botching that. A minute for every 10 yards, right?
Yes,
is that what
a minute
it is?
for every 10 yards. Yeah, I think it's that one.
So like you're running 10 yard excels, you should get a minute. Yes, that because what I said before wouldn't make sense. But yeah, so you are giving proper work to rest ratios, and you are making sure that it is not turning into or bleeding into, maybe is a easier way to say it, some kind of conditioning workout, right? So if you got your guys and you're expecting them to run 8-10 yard dashes in your session, whatever that is, they need to be allowed at least, maybe even more as you get deeper into that training session, a minute in between every single one of their sprints. Sometimes
100%.
that's as easy as sprint through the line, walk it back, and then maybe add an additional like 10 to 15 seconds onto that. Sometimes if you're just going back and forth, it's a sprint, and then we're just chilling on one side for a minute or a minute 10 or a minute 20. But understanding
100%.
how to, if you are truly working on speed, right? If that is what you're saying, that is the goal of that training session, how to structure it so you are getting the correct stimulus on your athletes that you are looking for,
100%.
right? And again,
we're going for anaerobic output, right? Especially that, right? As soon as we take away that window, right, we're no longer being able to go at 100% intensity. We're no longer able to go at that anaerobic threshold and keep pushing that envelope. And we start to dip our toe into an aerobic threshold, right? And at the same time, it's not even necessarily doing it from a good standpoint aerobically, right? Like you're just kind of dipping your toe in the aerobic pool, right? You're not actually going from a, full, elongated window of aerobic work, right? We're trying to train anaerobically, and then you're switching it to aerobic. And then you're caught into a weird gray middle area that really doesn't benefit anyone at that point, right?
Right. It just sucks. It just is like, it just sucks to do. You
100%.
might get, and again, we won't go off on a tangent, but that's where you get into like the mental toughness and all of that stuff, which is a whole nother conversation. But if your goal is to be getting a speed stimulus out of your athletes that you are working with, okay, giving them proper rest, and sometimes even like overshooting it and giving them more rest than they even feel like they want, is going to be a safe place to live, right? They might be getting a little bit bored or a little bit antsy, and I've seen and I've done it in the past where you cut your rest time down a little bit because you're like, the guys are just standing there, right? And we feel like they should always be moving as coaches. We don't want a lot of downtime. Sometimes they start getting a little bit out of hand. They might be like, I don't know, screwing around with each other, something like that. But understanding what you are doing as a coach and what you are asking of your athletes and how that plays into some of those work to rest ratios, I think is also really important. And again, we could probably dive into a whole other hour-long session about that, but we'll just kind of leave it surface level right now.
It's always about having that goal and going towards that goal and not letting stuff stray you away from there, right? And like, hey, if our goal is speed work and actually getting better at speed, right, we have to take, there's certain, processes and like boundaries that are set that are like, hey, this is how we're actually going to train it, right? And that's kind of pretty much what we're talking about overall.
Is there anything else that you have on the top of your brain? I know I kind of ambushed you with this topic, but anything else that's like you really see sticking out that might be misinformation or stuff that gets implemented incorrectly or anything like that?
Off the top of my head, no. We kind of talked a lot about what kind of goes through my head when I do kind of deep dive into this type of stuff. And yeah, I mean, speed kills, man.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's wrap right there.
Perfect.
Hopefully the background noise wasn't too loud, but we'll wrap there. Podcast 3, SSP, we're out. See ya.